So there's something that happens to me about once a month when I'm out in public. It used to happen a lot more, but it still happens about once a month. Someone will come up to me and say, you know, you look a lot like Pete Davidson. I don't have a picture of it. So, for those of you who don't know, Pete Davidson is a comedian. He became famous as a cast member on Saturday Night Live. He's known for growing up in Staten Island, dating celebrities like Ariana Grande and Kim Kardashian, and most recently crashing his car into a fire hydrant in an incident of reckless driving. So, you know, like, we're very similar. I've yet to convince anyone that Pete Davidson left Saturday Night Live to obtain rabbinic ordination. I'm still trying. And I have to admit it, if you ignore the sleeve of arm tattoos, we do look alike a little bit. I really know what it's like to be misrecognized. Because before I was mistaken for Pete Davidson, I was constantly being mistaken for my twin brother. And the funny thing about this misrecognition is that I look a lot more like Pete Davidson than I look like my twin brother. But anyone who grew up being a twin knows, being a twin, it just becomes part of your identity. You're one of the twins. So in all these misrecognitions, I find common cause with our biblical ancestor, Yosef, with Joseph. Because so much of this story in the last 3 parshiot, in these last 3 weeks of our Torah reading, it's a tale of recognition and misrecognition. It's an epic story about Joseph losing his name and then finding it again. Joseph is constantly misrecognized through the Torah. He's seen by others not as who he is, but as who they want or need him to be. When Joseph goes into the field to give a report to his father on the state of his brothers, the brothers mock his arrival, crying out, Hine bala chalamot, here comes the dreamer. And when Reuven notices that his brother Joseph is no longer in the pit and has been sold into slavery, he cries out, Hayeled einenu, the boy is gone. And when the brothers bring Joseph's coat, which is soaked in blood, to their father, they don't identify it as Joseph's coat. They simply say, we found this. Can you recognize it as your son's coat? And in all these interactions, Joseph is many things. He's a cocky and obnoxious dreamer. He's the vulnerable boy. He's the missing son. But he's not Joseph. He's an object in another person's story. He fills a role that helps characters say something about themselves. But in the process, he's reduced to a flat character. But luckily, this is just Act 1 of the Joseph story. And all of this misrecognition, it heightens the irony that we encountered in last week's Parsha and this week's Parsha. Because Joseph's brothers, who continue to misrecognize or misrepresent him, are now bowing down, believing that their brother is the second in command in Egyptian's monarchy. They plead for food from him in a time of famine. We know that Joseph stages an elaborate test under this guise of deception, framing their brother Benjamin with theft, requiring that he stay behind for his apparent misdeed of maybe stealing the golden goblet. And in the final chapter of the narrative, which we read this week, Joseph, who's been misrecognized his entire life, sees a new kind of recognition from his brothers. Judah steps forward, offering himself in place of his brother Benjamin. And Judah, by extension, now sees his brothers and the family in all of their fullness. Because Judah now understands what leaving Benjamin in Egypt would mean for Binyamin, for their father, and for the entire family. They know that this leaving of a brother behind is exactly what they once did to their brother Yosef, who they believe they will never ever see again. And in this moment, Joseph understands too that he deserves to be seen in his own fullness. He can no longer take the deception and the misrecognition we're told that Joseph can no longer control himself. He breaks down and sobs loudly, and he yells out, Ani Yosef. I am Joseph. He's ready to be seen fully by his brothers. He knows that they're in a new place for recognition with a new capacity. Judah's offer to take the place of his brother, it's where I see most clearly God's presence in this narrative. It's interesting. God doesn't interact with any of the biblical characters in the Joseph narrative. And this is surprising because so much of the book of Bereshit is about God's influence on the world. The first subject of Bereshit bara Elohim, God creates the world in the beginning of existence. And the next chapters follow God's interactions with Adam and Eve, with Cain and Abel, God sending a flood to destroy the world and destroying a Tower of Babel. And then God choosing one ordinary man, Abraham, to be the leader of this small Israelite nation. God makes Sarah laugh and sends angels to visit Abraham and wrestles with Jacob. And yet by the time we arrive at these three final parshiot, God no longer plays this primary character role in the story. There are famines and there are turns of fates, but there's no God. So perhaps God is listed and mentioned in this week's parsha not by name, but rather in the way the characters come to learn this key attribute of God, God's self, of being able to notice others and see others and recognize others in their most complex form. The Talmud gives us a name about God. God has many names in our tradition. It's not a common name, but it's incredibly meaningful to me. The Talmud calls God Chacham Harazim, the master of secrets. The Talmud teaches, one who sees a multitude of Israel, recites a blessing, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, Chacham Harazim. Blessed are you, God, sovereign of the universe, who is the knower of all secrets. Why is this the name? Because God sees a whole nation whose minds are all different, whose faces are all unlike, and God knows the secrets and the wishes that are in each of their hearts. And the Talmud continues to tell a specific story of Ben Zoma, who's standing in Jerusalem, looking down on the Temple Mount, seeing an assembly of 600,000 Israelites. And he gives this blessing, calling God the master and knower of secrets. I admire Ben Zoma in this rabbinic story because he sees the congregation and he realizes that though they may look like a mob of people, and that he can't see each of their stories, each of their fullness with his mind, he knows that seeing the world through God's eyes, he would be able to understand the fullness of each individual story and each individual person. Ben Zoma understands that God's power comes most poignantly, not only in an ability to send 10 plagues, but in a kind of radical recognition and ultimate empathy. To see the multitude and not just see them as a multitude, but as individuals with hopes and needs and secrets. To be known by God is to see others in their fullness and to be seen in one's fullness. By the end of this Parashat Vayigash, Jacob comes to Egypt to be reunited with his most loved son, Joseph. The family is once again together, but something else has also changed because the brothers who represent these future 12 tribes of Israel, they're now able to recognize each other in their fullness as well. And think about it, a core memory for Jacob in his life is tricking his own father into believing that he's his older brother Esau, putting on the animal furs. But by the end of Bereshit, the family moves forward not in misrecognition, but in recognition and full understanding. And this just feels particularly prescient at this moment, though I can't really think of a moment when this lesson wouldn't be prescient. that we take extra care in trying to see others in the way that God sees each of us. As I've been speaking about this and teaching about this for these last few months, so many are asking us, and I'm asking you and myself to hold this kind of complex recognition for those in Israel and Gaza, to not see the other side, whoever that other side may be, as a monolith. Certainly to see the world as a master of secrets, it must mean to understand the deep, deep pain and horror of those who woke up on October 7th to their nation under attack, under the worst attacks in its history. And in equal measure, it has to mean doing our very, very best, hard as it may be, to see each individual of 2 million displaced from their homes in Gaza, desperately seeking potable water and food and safety in the midst of one of the most intense bombing campaigns in history. If we can only see complexity on one side, we're the young Judah who justifies selling his brother. We've not yet come to see the world through God's eyes. And of course, this isn't just about Israel and Gaza. We have an opportunity to recognize each other at every moment, in every facet of life. I'm so deeply moved by this exercise that was proposed by the religion journalist Krista Tippett. She did this before the 2016 election with theologians, but after President Trump was elected, she was fielding countless questions from people and families and in communities who were asking, how can we talk to others who voted so differently than us? Could there really be room for understanding and nuance when so much was on the line? So she told people who wanted to see each other complexly not to misrecognize each other, but to ask each other this complex question. She said, sit next to the other and ask, tell me about who you voted through the story of your life. And people who asked this question to each other had much longer conversations, and they were forced to share what they had lived, their hopes and their fears. And then they had to do the hardest thing. They had to listen to someone else say the same exact thing. It's an exercise not of consensus. It's an exercise of understanding and recognition. It's a question that's not meant to open debate, but to see each other with wider eyes. You might say divine eyes. So in 2024, our difficult conversations are not going to relent. We'll participate in a new presidential election and a mayoral election. We'll continue to work for peace in Israel and in Gaza. And we'll continue to do the work of building a Beth Am community in our year of Am, literally our year of peoplehood. A community that's both cohesive and very, very diverse. The contentious conversations, I imagine, will remain contentious. And the question is, will we be the people who are committed to doing the work of recognizing each other? Will we put in the time to listen to people explain themselves in the context of the story of their lives? Perhaps a vision of a most just community is one in where each person can be identified through their own name and their own truth. Because by the end of the parsha, Joseph can't hide anymore. He shouts out, Ani Yosef. What would it be like to be in a community where we could each shout our own names? Perhaps we won't become the ultimate masters of secrets. I think the point of the Talmudic story is that no human could. But we have a role in recognizing each other and seeing each other in our own fullness and their fullness. What might it take for us to build communities in which each person feels safe and feels free to shout out their own name and to shout it in a way where others will hear it? Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom.